Good morning and welcome back to Sakima's Ridge Homestead. I'm Brian and today we're going to install the Meyer's 17162 mounting carton on this 2000 F350. This mounting kit came off the F250 we had previously that we've sold. I did remove all the plow hardware off of that truck before we sold it in anticipation of putting it on this truck. So let's get started.
Hello and welcome to our channel.
We're glad you're here. Step one in the instructions is to measure from the ground to the center of one of these bottom bolts that hold the bumper on. I'm at about 26.5 inches. You're supposed to record that data because later on in the installation, the height of this bolt is used to determine which set of bolts you attach the lower units to. So we'll write down 26.5 and move on to the next step. Okay, the next step is to remove the bumper. You've got two what look like acorn nuts, but they're actually bolt heads on each side of the bumper next to the tow hook. And in the center, there's a rubber flap underneath that has three little plastic push pins. So you have to pop those three push pins out and remove these four bolts. One added note to that, if you have a diesel, your cord that goes down to the block heater is usually also attached to the back of the bumper with a little push pin. So you need to take that cord push pin out as well. So let me get this bumper off of here and we'll continue from there. These are the original hardware that hold the bumper on. As you can see, the acorn nuts are actually more bolts. And then it's got this bar with the two nuts on the back side. They go back behind here. Mine also had these little clips that held the bolts to the bumper. It's going to be easier to put back together without these clips on, so I just let them fall off. So you take these and hold these aside. You will, at least I will, reuse these. These are the little clips. I just used a set of needle nose pliers, stuck them in there and popped these three clips out. And then the same thing for the clip here on the wiring harness for the block heater. Once you get those four bolts off and these clips off, the bumper just basically swings right out. I took it over and sat it beside the truck. Now I am also going to remove my tow hooks, which is not necessary for the plow installation, but I'll be putting a front receiver on this truck as well. I do have a video previously from that. I'll put it up here in the corner. I installed that on the F250. There's no need to redo that because it's the same installation on this truck. But since that will be going on here, I do need to take these tow hooks off. The bumper bolts were 18 millimeter. I think these bolts for the tow hooks are 15. But let me get these two tow hooks off and then we will start with the plow installation. Okay, and following the instructions, once the bumper is removed from the vehicle, position brackets 3, which is these little L-shaped brackets, over top of the vehicle frame horns, which would be here. Put the left hand and right hand mount assemblies 4 and 5 into place, attaching brackets 3 to mount 4 and 5 loosely at top from front hole using the 1/2 inch bolt and lock nut, and the rear hole using the 1/2 inch bolt and handle nut. So there's your regular 1/2 inch bolt and nut, and there's your 1/2 inch bolt and what they call a handle nut. You can't get to this bolt, so they give you this nut with a long stick on it so you can reach it up in here to get to this back hole. And then the bracket they're talking about, the 4 and 5 left and right hand, is this big bracket here, and it fits up in and wraps around behind the spring. Now one other thing I should note that we did before getting to this point was installed new front springs and new rear springs on this truck. And the reason we did that beforehand is this bolt right here that holds the front spring in has to go out the back side, and once the plow is on, the back side is right here on this bracket. So all this bracketry would have to be removed to change the front spring. I also have a video where we changed the front spring on the F250. I'll put that up here in the corner as well. I didn't feel like making a second video because the springs on this were identical to changing that broken spring on the F250. And I believe in that video I did show where I had to remove this plow bracket to get that spring changed. So let me get this bracket up in there. Get these bolts attached. That's the bolt there that uses the handle nut. And the other one just bolts here. Like so. Where did I set my instructions? Here they are. Okay, now you're supposed to attach the left and right brackets, which here we're only doing the right hand side of the truck, but this is mirrored on the left hand side. There is a spacer. This chunk of steel here, this spacer goes right here behind the bumper bracket, in between the bumper bracket and that mount plate. So you have to wedge that spacer up in there, and then you're supposed to attach that using 2 carriage bolts and nuts. Now, because I'm putting the front receiver on here, I will not be using the carriage bolts. The factory plow bracket gives you 2 carriage bolts that fit in these slots here for the bumper holes that aren't used, because the bumper only actually bolts on these 2 outside holes. So with these 2 holes here, you put the carriage bolts through this bracket, through this spacer rather, through the bracket back here, and tighten the nuts up, and that will draw this bracket up to its proper position. So since I don't have carriage bolts, we'll just have to use something else and get this in position. And please look past the noise in the background. That's the peacocks up in the rafters running around. Well, I actually had a little trouble getting those on there. It's almost like the cab is a little too far forward on the frame, and I was having trouble fitting those 1/2-inch spacers in behind the bumper bracket in between the plow bracket. But I finally got them in there. I went a little out of step just because I was having the trouble. I attached the universal clevis, which goes in between these 2 brackets on the bottom, just to help square things up, because the way the back of the bracket was hitting the radiator core support piece, it was twisting the bracket inward. So I had to use this bracket to help square the plates up. But they're in there. I ended up using the bolts that I actually used to hold the front hitch receiver on, these 2 socket head bolts, and they've got the handle nuts as well, because with that receiver up here, you cannot get behind here to put bolts on or nuts on, so they give you these handle nuts to get up in there. So that's been attached. This has been snugged up top. If you can see very well, there's a hole here and a hole right here on the bracket that goes to the front. We need to install this bracket on each side next. These 2 holes here match up with those 2 holes, and it goes approximately like that. Once this is bolted in place, we have to mark this hole and this hole on the frame, and then we'll have to take these brackets back off and drill. They call for an 11/16 hole, but I don't have an 11/16 hole saw, so I'm just going to make them 3/4. That little bit extra shouldn't hurt. But we'll get that bracket bolted on there and mark for those holes, and then we will get those holes drilled. Well, both brackets have been attached, and I marked holes. I've drilled a pilot hole in this hole and in this hole. I need to take this bracket back off and then drill those 2 holes out with a 3/4 hole saw. Bolt this bracket back on, and then mark and drill this hole once everything else is snugged up. Same thing, drill a pilot hole and then a 3/4 hole. Now these 2 bolts back here are big long handle bolts, because they have to go all the way back through the frame. And this one on the other side actually broke when I was taking it off the other truck, so I had to make a weld repair on it up here on the top, weld it back on. But we'll pull these 2 brackets back off, this side and the other side, get these 4 holes drilled, 2 on this side, 2 on that side, put these long handle bolts down through the frame, Get these bolted up nice and snug. Then we'll mark these holes, this side and the other side. Pull those two little brackets off and drill those, and then we can tighten everything up good and tight. Both rear brackets are on. As you can see, those are shiny new bolts. The original handle bolts were in pretty bad shape, pretty rusty, and they just weren't going to do it this time. Fortunately, I'm fit enough. I'm able to get my arm down inside the frame and get those bolts in without the long handles. So that's the route we decided to go. So this one's tight, that one's tight, and the two down here are tight. Now we need to mark both these front holes, take that little bracket off, and drill both the front holes. The front bracket bolt is now installed and tight on both sides. These are tight, these are all tight. One thing left to do is to take these 4 bolts out on both sides and reverse them so that the bolt head is out here instead of the nuts. Put the nuts on the inside, and then we'll hang the actual clevis that the plow mounts on. Everything's installed. I went ahead and turned these bolts around and put the nuts on the inside. Just personal preference. I think if the nuts are on the inside, they're a little more protected. They don't get hit by anything. Not that this should ever come off again, but you never know. At this point of attaching this universal clevis and attaching your plow clevis is where that measurement we took earlier from the bumper bolt of 26.5 inches comes into play. You can probably see here, there's 2 holes hanging underneath this plate. And you've got your bolt here, and there's also a hole behind this plate here. So you can either bolt it in these 2 holes or in these 2 holes, depending on that measurement. And then you probably can't, you can't see it at all, but there's a plate right up here that this clevis bolts to. And again, it has different holes in it, so you can bolt it either at this level or at this level. Since we were 27 or probably 26.5 inches, that tells me I need to put this universal clevis at the top holes so it's as low as possible, and I have to put the plow clevis on the lowest set of holes so it's also as low as possible. This bottom hole here and this front hole are the 2 holes that the plow attaches to. Now my plow is the older MD2 style, so it's got the 2 holes because it's got the 6 pins on it. It's got the 4 blue pins that goes in these 2 holes and the 2 on the other side. Then it's got a yellow pin here in the center. I can pull that yellow pin and drop just the blade and A-frame and leave the pump and lights on the truck. The newer style, the easy mount I believe they're called, this bottom hole is actually like a pocket. And there's a rod in that plow that goes in that pocket, and then you lift the plow up, put your blue pins in, and you're good to go. And that's all you have is 2 blue pins. But the mounting up here is the same no matter which plow you have. The only difference would be your bottom clevis. The only question I have is I'm getting new tires put on this in 2 days. The tires that are on here are oversized tires. I'm putting the original size back on. So that may lower me down a little bit. So I might have to adjust this once the new tires go on. This bottom hole is supposed to be centered at roughly 11.25 inches off the ground. That's what these adjustments are supposed to do with these different bolt holes. You want your A-frame as level with the ground as possible when you're plowing, because if it's too high or too low, when you angle the blade, it's going to force the leading edge or the trailing edge harder into the ground, and you'll end up wearing the ends of your wear bar more than the center. So if you've got worn edges, it could be because your clevis is either too high or too low and your A-frame is not level. So we'll go ahead and mount this up here where it says at the lowest holes and see where that puts this hole, see if we're about 11.25 or not. And then after we put the new tires on it, we'll double check it and see where it's at that point. Okay, when I measured up to my bottom hole, it was around 9 inches. So I raised the clevis up inside the universal clevis from the bottom set of holes to the top set of holes, and it gave me roughly 11 inches. So we'll see once the plow's installed how that A-frame looks, and once the new tires go on where it's at, we may have to set, like I said before, I may have to adjust that again. One other thing I'm going to have to do is on the cable, which is here, that's my power cord for the block heater. This little clip is supposed to pin in right here into a hole that the plow now covers. So I do have a spare hole right back here. I'm just going to cut the tape on this, move this clip back to here, tape it onto there, and be able to pop it in there. So all I have left to do at this point is put the bumper back on. I'm not going to do that in this video because the next step is to do the wiring, which will be a separate video because it's going to make this one too long. But as far as the bumper goes, you just stick the bumper back on, put your 4 bolts in, and you're done. Of course, I have to deal with the front receiver on this, which, like I said, there's another video on. I'm not going to show that in this one. So that's installing the, I believe Myers calls it the mounting carton for a Myers plow on a 99 through, I believe, 07 Super Duty, F350 or F250. The only difference between the 99 through 03, I believe, and the 03 through 07 is the older trucks have the leaf springs, the newer trucks have coil springs. But it does take the same mounting carton for any of those vehicles. So if you're putting one of these on your truck, I hope this helps. Any questions or comments, please put them down below. Please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. You have a good day.